Think we could get started. Is everyone ready for another amazing session at Women Deliver? All right. Well, I want to first thank you all for coming to this session because I know that this house is packed full of amazing people and amazing sessions. So thank you for coming here to attend this one. I am Andalusia Soloff. I'm a freelance journalist and filmmaker focused on ending gender violence in Mexico, where I'm visiting you from today. So thank you. I know we keep saying, but we can't say it enough, how excited we are to be here again in person. That there's no Zoom screen separating us, there's no technical difficulties, hopefully. And we can be here, we could listen to each other, we could see each other, we could hug each other, we could eat together, and maybe even get to dance and sing together. So here's a big applause to being here at Women Deliver in person here in Kigali, Rwanda. All right, so today we are going to tackle a very big topic, as many people here are used to tackling very big topics. How do we build a feminist world through the power of feminist policies? What does it really take to change our global system? What do systemic alternatives that are rooted in human rights and centering justice look like? How do we move forward both to explore a new global order, but challenge it? Because the global order we have right now, it seems like every time we take one step forward, we also take 2 steps back. There's increasing challenges to reproductive justice rights across the globe. There is increasing violence against women, like in Mexico, where 10 women are killed every single day and their murderers are almost never brought to justice. And also where we have incidents, tragedies, like the recent boat that came from this continent and where hundreds of people died, drowned in the ocean, yet the news was just full of a submarine full of billionaires. And no one was talking about what was happening here. They were in search of a better life, as are women across the world who are facing crisis. And yesterday, as we heard Malala talk about, that unfortunately, many of the girls of this world have to pay for the crisis of the adults. So what can we do to challenge that? And maybe some of you were here in the previous session, which was about climate change, and that is what is on the news this week. Climate change is wreaking havoc across our entire world, that we are seeing temperatures that are so hot that they have never been seen before. So how are we going to challenge that? Okay, so today we are going to explore this new, sometimes frightening, global order and reimagine what can a feminist future look like. So we are going to have today some policymakers, activists, artists, Nobel Peace Laureates, and some youth leaders, all engaging in conversations around these issues: taxation, debt, development finance, migration, a care economy, and also understanding the enduring impacts of colonization. Will you join us as we discuss how we can build girls' and women's leadership to construct a feminist future in the midst of all these crises? First, I would like to welcome my fellow moderator, Thompson. Lyric is the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at the International Center for Research on Women, an appointee to the North Carolina Council for Women, a board member of North Carolina Women United, and professor of advocacy for women's rights at George Washington University. Let's give it up for Lyric. All right, thank you, Lyric. What is that bag you got here? She is styling. What do you want? What's your bag say?
Now, is it time for the panelists to join me?
It is time for the panelists.
All right, let's get it started. Come on out. So, thank you so much to our hosts, and
let's give it up for the panelists.
thank you so much to our hosts and our sponsors, to the wonderful team at Women Deliver who has really co-created this session with us, and mostly to my fellow speakers and those of you who are spending an hour with us today to talk about some really innovative and exciting approaches to policy at the global, regional, national, and state level. I'm going to frame the conversation and then introduce each speaker in turn, since we are running short on time. But if you don't know these sheroes, you should definitely read their full bios because they're truly incredible. So, feminist policies. What are we talking about? If I know anything about this audience, and perhaps some of our panelists, we may have some skeptics. So I think the goal of this conversation is to be very precise and specific about what we mean when we say feminist policies. There are many feminisms, and we're thrilled to be in the Women Deliver conference centering African feminist visions for the first time for this conference. And we're also cognizant that feminism may not be an appropriate or even useful term to apply to some policies in some contexts, and we think that's okay. In our work at the Feminist Foreign Policy Collective, we come to this work in a spirit of curiosity, of openness, and of optimism. That if we are going to address the poly crisis and the issues that Andalusia and previous panels have so perfectly situated for us, that we're going to need to do things differently. I think the two words that have come up the most in consultations with you all and global conversations on feminist approaches to policy that I have heard have been accountability, being precise about what you intend to do, and then being transparent about how you're doing in achieving it, course correcting where you aren't, and doing that in co-creation and deep dialogue with feminists who are on the receiving end of these policies. I think it's also important to say that as we are learning and innovating together, that this is a dynamic, provocative, evocative field. And even as we have this conversation together today, I hope we're all taking home learnings that we can apply in our own contexts. So I think the way that I've heard this situated best is we can all agree it's the content and not the container that matters most. So if you do not apply the term feminist to your policy tools, that's fine. But if you do, you're inviting a level of ambition, accountability, and scrutiny, and this is the community that's going to give that to you. So I'm grateful to my fellow panelists here who are going to tell us how things are going in various contexts. Memory Kachambwa, I'm going to start with you. You are the executive director of one of the coolest organizations and movements that I've ever had the privilege of working with, Femnet. And as a Pan-African feminist who has deep experience organizing and influencing feminist policies at various levels, I'd like to invite you to frame the debate for us. What do you mean when you say a policy is feminist? And can you give us some specific examples of how you have arrived there in your work? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lyric, and a shout out to Lyric. So I think what makes policies feminist is the fundamental acknowledgement that feminist policies need to be built on feminist principles. And on the African continent, we've got the African Charter of Feminist Principles, which really, actually what it talks about is looking at issues around power and how power plays. So it is really important for us to reflect on the lived realities of women, of girls, of gender-expansive persons, and also this is what a feminist policy should actually be reflecting. I think being on the African continent, I should say we stand a lot on the shoulders of African feminists who have gone before us. And I really wanted to acknowledge that because feminism is not new to the continent. Feminism might not have been called feminism, but when we think of Queen Zinga of Angola, Ya Asantewa of Ghana, Bibi Titi Mohammed of Tanzania, and our own fearless feminist freedom fighter, Freedom Nyambuya from my country, Zimbabwe. They were fighting against colonial, they were fighting against fundamental structural injustices. And we might not have called them feminist because maybe it was too bitter for the patriarchs to call it feminist, but they were feminist. So a feminist policy should challenge some of the patriarchal and reinforcing oppressive system, our isms, the isms we talk about, the capitalisms, colonialism, racism, neoliberalism, militarism, imperialism. So this should really be what feminist policies should be looking at. They should also be responding in disrupting these oppressive systems. If we look at some of the economic injustices which are being caused by large-scale investments that cause displacement without reparations, it is the women who are displaced. Investments that also as a result of illicit financial flows, investment that are as a result of militarism, and we see them being also centered on some of the conflicts that we face. So feminist policies should be bold enough to really look at those fundamental issues which we have covered up. And when a crisis happened, it's the structural injustices that emerge. And this is what the shocks do, and this is why we need feminist policies. African countries, 22 African countries are currently in debt or debt distress and debt crisis. So it is also important to look at issues of debt. How do we deal with them? Feminist policies should look at those issues. It is an opportunity to look at a feminist future that is just. Trade policies that are inclusive, trade policies that also do not result in the extinction of sovereign food seeds that our mothers that we know have actually are at the forefront of protecting. Policies that ensure that they redress the land injustices. We are on a continent where land rights that most women that we are suffering are also as a result of colonial legacies. So that's what feminist policies should really unearth and should really posture solutions that look at these issues. And I think I want to end by just saying feminist policies should be transformative, they should be disruptive. They should not just be an intent, a declaration of intent, but there must be a declaration of action. There must be a declaration of intention of a just world, of a feminist world. And we have the Maputo Protocol. So shout out to 20 years of Maputo Protocol, which guides us, and it is a feminist policy, which we can also say we can start with. So thank you, Lyric. I'll pass the mic.
to advance feminist policies at both the national level, calling on Maputo, and then also centering frameworks like Maputo as very much part of the canon, the emerging canon of feminist policies. We're also disruptive here, so I'm grateful to the Honorable Minister Williametta Seydi Tar of Liberia. She's the Minister for Gender, Children, and Social Protection. And we've disrupted protocol by centering our activists first, but I'd love to invite you now, Minister, to tell us a little about what's happening in Liberia. So many amazing Liberian feminists here this week, and I hear that your president is calling himself the feminist in chief. What's going on there? What does he mean, and how are you seeing that in your work and in the policy agenda of your government?
Thank you so much, and we really appreciate Women Delivers for having us here today. Yes, our president calls himself the feminist in chief, and he did that as soon as he became president in October of 2018. And he was basically just emphasizing his own commitment to seeing gender equality and women's empowerment. It also signifies his own belief in the importance of the historical marginalization and discrimination against women and girls of Liberia. So saying that he's ready for that fight. Because obviously, with me as Minister of Gender, if my president calls himself a feminist in chief, I'm hanging on that to ensure that we get everything we need to get.
Very strategic.
Definitely. So in terms of policy and the work that we do, it has been very intentional and purposeful. One of the key initiatives of the president is making sure that we're able to say that we'll be on par with what the world considers, especially when it comes to cabinet. So right now we are 1/3 of cabinet in terms of women, so we're just there. But I also say that we hold some of the most important positions. So we have women who are Minister of Health, the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Commerce and Industry. We have the General Services Director, the Minister of Public Works. Right? So we have the National Oil Company, Fisheries, the Petroleum Refinery Company. Normally these spaces are where men are like fighting to get into, and the president felt that it was important that you have women to lead in those kind of sectors. So we've already been working on that. And then one of the other things that through the implementation of 1325, the president remained committed to ensuring that the security sector continues to make strides. So right now, for example, in our national police force, we have at the highest level, 50%, in terms of a male and a female at the head. We have our deputy chief of staff who's a female. President most recently appointed within this administration his first female chief justice. So, just purposefully looking at making sure that women are leading in a strong way. And we've done so many different programs, and with the political will demonstrated by the president itself, we're able to first come in and do the land rights law right away in 2018, and then 2019 we passed the domestic violence law, because we felt it was important that women are protected in the space, once we're doing the work that we have to do. And, we also look at how else. So under education and health, economic empowerment, gender-based violence prevention, those are things that are high on the agenda. And so our own interest in the feminist foreign policy stemmed from the fact that when we heard about it and we thought about all the things we were doing, like gender-responsive budgeting, and the president mandated that every ministry, agency, commission made sure we established gender inclusion units, it just felt right, that, we are already doing these things, so we might as well adopt this policy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're really excited to see all of the progress you're making. And if we have time, we'll come back and talk about the first sub-Saharan African feminist foreign policy again. But just to say, we really appreciate that you're picking up on the rights piece, the representation piece, and certainly a proud tradition of feminist organizing in the country. So good luck to you. Let's travel to France now, and we're so thrilled to welcome Ambassador Delphine O, who is the Ambassador at Large and Secretary General of the Generation Equality Forum, which I know a number of you were very active in making and are now implementing various commitments. France is also one of the countries that has a feminist foreign policy or a feminist diplomacy, and you've been at it for a few years now. So can you share with us your story of how France came to this decision, how it's going for you, and what you see for the future?
Thank you, Lyric. Hi, everybody. So indeed, France was the third country in the world to adopt a feminist foreign policy, following in the footsteps of Sweden and Canada in 2019. Today, we have about a dozen countries in the world, in the global north, but also in the global south, that have adopted a feminist foreign policy. I'm just going to name them because it's important to know who they are. So Sweden, Canada, France, Luxembourg, Spain, Mexico, Germany, the Netherlands, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Liberia, and hopefully soon to come, the first Asian feminist foreign policy, Mongolia. Just to say that, to answer, yes, we can applaud them. Some of the voices that say that feminism is a white neo-colonial concept. It's very important that we have half of the feminist foreign policy countries today actually coming from the global south. Now, there's no single universal definition of what a feminist foreign policy is. I'll just give you mine. For me, feminist foreign policy is to make sure that gender equality and women's rights are never a secondary thought in our foreign policy. And to be honest, that's a hard battle within government and outside government. That's to mainstream gender equality through every single component of our foreign policy. Of course, through our development cooperation assistance. Of course, through our human rights international policy. But it's also to make sure that gender equality is part of our international climate policy, a part of our international trade policy, international economic policy. You've talked about this memory, international cultural policy, international security policy, and so on. It's also to make sure that it's being owned by every single diplomat, not only by the top authorities, the ministry, and by the way, we have a female foreign minister, we have 2 undersecretary of states who are women, we have a secretary general of the ministry who's a woman now, but by every single direction, every single embassy, every single consulate in the world makes gender equality a priority. Now, it's been 4 years since we had this feminist foreign policy. What did we achieve? It's going to take too long. We made sure that in every single multilateral space where we are, and as France, we are in many of those, of course, the UN General Assembly, the UN Security Council, the G7, the G20, the OECD, the European Union, the Council of Europe, and so on and so on. We make sure that when it's not in the agenda, we need to put gender equality and women's rights in the agenda. We also launched a wealth of initiatives and projects and funds during these 4 years. Unfortunately, I don't have time to list all of them. I just want to mention one of them because it's so important. It's about funding, and specifically funding feminist movements, grassroots organizations from the global south. So in 2020, we launched a support fund for feminist organizations from the global south. In 3 years, we have transferred 135 million euros to more than 1,000 organizations in 75 countries of the global south. That's the first in volume, that's the first government fund actually funding feminist organizations in the global south. Now, there's still a lot of work to do, of course. It's an uphill battle every day for for us feminists in the government to convince our colleagues and to make sure this is again a priority and not a secondary thought. It's also an uphill battle to make sure, to echo Memory's words, that our policies are rooted and anchored in feminist principles. But I do have curiosity and optimism like you.
Wonderful. Bring that energy. Yes. Thank you, Ambassador. So we've had a good look, I think, at the global and the federal level. But what we see in a feminist policy space, which is about disrupting the way things have traditionally been done, there's often more room to experiment and to innovate at the subnational level. And a lot of good work going on that we don't always hear about that then trickles up. And I'm so thrilled to introduce the Honorable Minister Natalie Hutchins, who is the Minister for Women in Victoria State in Australia. And as I understand it, Victoria was the first among a number of states really asserting some feminist principles and practice. Would you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and what results are you achieving?
Thank you. It's just an absolute pleasure to be here. And yes, our state has been leading our nation in feminist policies and in gender equality budgeting and legislation, and I think that's really important. We had a very conservative national government for the past 10 years. That changed a year ago, so now we're working hand in hand with the new government to implement a lot of the policies that we've already put in place at a state level, and it's a real pleasure to be able to do that. Firstly, just to take you through some of the policies, we have been guided by having a statewide gender equality strategy, which goes to every single department across every portfolio, so that it's not just a women's policy strategy, but gender equality embedded across every single portfolio. Secondly, we've had gender responsive budgeting, and that also includes when a pitch is put in for a budget item, there must be a gender equality assessment done against that. Thirdly, we have set ourselves a target for quotas of women on government boards. We set a quota of 50%, and I'm really pleased to say in March this year, we achieved a 54% quota of women. And more recently, we've expanded our program of having free sanitary products across our schools into public spaces, and we've committed to 700 public spaces across our state that will have free pads and tampons available.
Awesome.
Finally, I just want to touch on our Gender Equality Act. This is something I'm extremely proud of. Our Gender Equality Act has been in place now for 3 years, and what it does is puts a benchmark in place, a line in the sand to assess where gender equality is across the public sector. So our public sector departments, our local government areas, and also our universities, to assess the leadership roles that women have, the women's access to safe workplaces, sexual harassment free, also looking at the gender pay gap in those organisations as well. But the assessment also looks at the policies and implementation those organisations are working on. So there's been over 300 organisations across our state that have been measured. These are transparent and on our website, and we have a Gender Equality Commissioner that does this work and oversees it. And also, as part of this program, we have gender equality action plans. So a plan to improve it that gets assessed every 2 years. And fundamentally, the way that we got to do all of these wonderful policies and more, particularly in women's health, we've done more than we've ever done before in supporting and recognising the unique challenges women face with their health. We've done this because we had affirmative action in our parliaments, in our political parties, and I'm really pleased to say we've reached more than 50% of women in our state parliament and 64% of women at our cabinet table. So it's a first in Australia to have that outcome.
Well done. Thank you. That's really, really inspiring, and I'm so thrilled you're able to share some of those best practices with all of us and also with your new national government. So congratulations. You are Aya Shebi. You are the founder of Nala Feminist Collective, and we've heard several speakers at this point talk about how they have worked to innovate within government, but we know that's not always the path for achieving more feminist policies. Your path as a Pan-African feminist who hails from Tunisia has also experienced how to assert feminist demands from the streets. Tell us a little bit about your journey, what you learned, what you achieved, and what you see for the future.
Thank you so much, Lyric. I love your bag, by the way. Shout out. Shout out also to Nala Fem council members and volunteers in the room. Shout out to Obama leaders and everybody that I've been working with. It's really amazing to be surrounded by feminists from around the world. I want to offer a nuanced perspective to what have been shared by civil society and member states. Because currently there is no international framework that says this is what feminist policy is about. And that leaves a danger of member states picking and choosing what is feminist and what is not, and usually just promoting or defining feminist policy as promoting women's rights in diplomacy and development, and that's it. So I want to raise three main issues that we really need to look at if we want to make feminist policy, existing ones, feminist, and also countries who don't have the framework but say they're feminist, or they have a strategy on women and gender. So the first one is lack of coherence. There are a lot of countries that say they are feminist or have feminist strategy or policies, but they do everything else that is not feminist. There is nothing feminist. There is nothing feminist about the United Kingdom raising the visa fee to 10–20%, which eventually will exacerbate gender equality, especially for African migrants, and will encourage dominant classes to enjoy stability on the back of anti-migrant theology. There is nothing feminist about the European Commission blessing a deal between Tunisia and Italy to encourage forkless Europe. The European Commission was in Tunisia last week. They knew that black migrants were dying on the Libyan borders. They said nothing about it. There is nothing feminist about Australia arms export to bomb women in Yemen and Syria, right? While on the other side also providing humanitarian assistance to the same countries. And the list goes on. All European countries that are contributing to a climate framework that is capitalist and patriarchal, there is nothing feminist about it when Africa contributes the least and impacted by the most. And really the list goes on. So first of all is coherence. Global leaders, we need coherence. The second is there is this white saviorism or white feminist saviorism that says because these policies started by Sweden and other European countries, and post-colonial feminism says that this feminist foreign policy can be used to perpetuate global hierarchies and basically say that we are the expert in feminism and we're gonna come and save you, poor women, helpless women, and save you from your dictator and culture and religions that is oppressing you. And that is completely that is completely excluding other bodies of knowledge, indigenous knowledge in Africa, for example, and other ideas and other bodies of understanding what feminism is. The third point is on peace and security. Unfortunately, not only we have lack of coherence, not only we have this white saviorism, feminist imperialism, but also now countries started to, in the name of gender equality and women's rights, militarize and go and have security policies in other countries. For example, the United States security policies in Iraq and Pakistan now, after years of study, prove that it only exacerbated gender inequality and didn't empower women in those countries, and only promoted hyper-masculinized way of understanding security in these countries. Germany is the 4th largest arms export of arms all around the world, basically violating international human rights. So any country that is exporting arms, which are mostly affecting women and girls, do not count for the prevalence of gender-based violence, which is facilitated by that arms control. So you can't say, you are feminist leader in the feminist. So essentially, I think all of these countries lecturing us about feminism should look inward, because they're using also the feminist policies to avoid their national shortcomings of dealing with their own gender equality and promoting this image that we are a feminist leader globally, but really, nationally, there is a lot that you have to deal with. So I think moving forward, we need to address the gap between practice and rhetoric, the lack of coherence, and also the top-down approach. All of these policies are produced by foreign affairs ministries who have no horizontal way of engaging civil society in the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that master class in how not to feminist policy. I think the question of pinkwashing is one that's top of mind for many, or hopefully most of us who do this work. And I want to pick up on your last theme about working horizontally and co-creating with civil society as a really important key ingredient. And the truth that the process of feminist policy making is every bit as important, perhaps more so, than the product. And I want to invite you, Ambassador O, to talk briefly about a model of government institutionalization of a mechanism to get that kind of critical feedback from civil society partners. What is the High Council for Gender Equality? How's it work? And how do they think you're doing with your feminist foreign policy?
Thank you. To Aya's point and your point about who defines feminism, so France has had a feminist foreign policy, but we haven't had a guiding document or framework of what it means. We're currently in the process of writing, another international strategy for feminist foreign policy. What's very interesting is that that document is going to be written in co-creation with feminist civil society organization. The same way that the fund that I talked about yesterday, that is funding organizations in the Global South, was co-created, is actually being co-led with feminist civil society organizations from the Global North and from the Global South. To your question, France is the only country in the world that has an independent body with a legal mandate to monitor and evaluate all public policies across all ministries from a gender perspective. It's comprised of experts, civil society organizations, and academia, nobody from government, and they publish regular reports on how we're doing in terms of the gender perspective in all of our policies. That also applies to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs And so they published 2 reports evaluating fully independently our feminist foreign policy. It's in French and English. It's very long. It's critical, and it should be critical, because it is the role of civil society to hold us, governments, accountable, as Aya said, to what we committed to what we promised when we use the word feminists. Some of the recommendations we definitely integrated. For instance, making sure it is not a secondary issue from a sub directorate within the ministry. It has political authority because the feminist foreign policy is being led by Secretary General of the ministry, who's the second highest person after the minister in the ministry. And it's also making sure that all of the embassies, all of the directorates are fully owning this feminist foreign policy. They also told us, now you need to put your money where your mouth is, and this is what we did with the feminist fund that I mentioned before. Now, there are still a lot of recommendations, making sure that it's not just the foreign ministry, but all of the other ministries. And also, to your points, the defense ministry should also be involved when we talk about an international security policy, which is feminist, the justice ministry, the education ministry, and so on. So it's a very interesting model because this is a very official report. It's very transparent. Everybody has access to it. There's a lot of publicity around it. And so we as government officials definitely have to respond and to integrate their recommendations.
That's great to hear, and thank you for that. Minister Saidi Tar, we are running short on time, but I wonder if you'd care to come into the conversation either around your ambitions for the first sub-Saharan African feminist foreign policy, or if you care to pick up on anything in terms of process and other issues of coherence.
Thank you so much. I really liked the positioning here because I myself, most times I think about, okay, how do we get a foreign minister to talk about issues that concerns gender, right? And most times I'm like, okay, so what are we doing? So for me, I really feel that apart from foreign ministries, make sure you have the right people in the room, the gender minister, the feminists in the country, and all of that. And that is what we're trying to do there in Liberia. Liberian women are very vocal. We have this thing about nothing for us should be without us, along the way, right? So it's important that the voices are heard and that they have a say in what they want to see happen. And whereby the Liberian feminist foreign policy will be an approach that prioritizes gender equality, but then also women's right empowerment. We try to do intentional things where, like right now within government, I cannot speak for civil society or other private companies, but within government, we all have, the president came in and did a harmonization of pay. So everybody makes the same amount. If you're a female secretary or a male secretary, you make the same amount, for example. We're right now going to elections this year. The president has committed to seeing more women political participation because that is something that's very important. We know when women lead, a lot of things happen. So political will at the highest level, but then also the National Election Commission made sure that all political parties sign a 30% quota. Even though we're fighting for it right now, the results coming out of the registration says we're at 15% women, but we're climbing that hill gradually, and we know that we'll be able to get there. So basically, Liberia feminist foreign policy will be rooted in our commitment to creating a more just and equitable space for women in Liberia, and to ensure that we're all through all of government and working with civil society to ensure that women are getting the just desserts.
Perfect. Thank you. We wish you all the best, and I'm sure there's a huge community of stakeholders who would love to be part of that process. Thank you. Memory, I know you mentioned a lot of policy areas where your work has asserted a feminist approach and a lot of work to do. I don't think we heard from you about your African vision for feminist foreign policy, the manifesto that you are currently envisioning. Can you share more about that work in your final remarks?
I also wanted just to acknowledge also Aya's position, and I think one of the things that came out from a collective of African feminists is how can we have our own narrative? How can we also put out there and shape what, from an African perspective, what does feminist foreign policy look like? So we have African Collective on Feminist Policies, because we really want to come up with a manifesto which incorporates our experiences in terms of how we want to define feminist policies. And this is it's a body of work where we want to bring together activists who are working at the front lines of the climate crisis, land rights activists, young women's activists, I mean, in all their diversities, because we feel when we are talking policy, it has to be defined, and we need to create the spaces where we can actually say it in our own words, in our own meaning, also acknowledging, you know, the bodies of work that has already been on the continent. So that's the kind of body of work that we are really pushing for, and we will be having it out in a few months, and we'll be happy to share with a broader collective and broader networks.
We can't wait, and we will cite and utilize. Minister Hutchins, in your closing remarks, could you please tell us, picking up on this important theme of feminist policy is not just about lifting up some women, it's about an intersectional approach that takes a power-based lens and attempts to use policy tools to acknowledge traditional harm and exclusion, and then redistribute power where possible. Tell us a bit about the work with First Nations communities on the Truth, Treaty, and Voice initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say up front that as a government and as a feminist, are absolutely committed to ensuring that the girls of today become the empowered women of tomorrow, regardless of the colour of their skin, their religion, their economic backgrounds. We need to make sure that all women are lifted up, and that's an important part of our policy work. And to make sure that we have true intersectionality across all of our work. And the way we do that is by embedding self-determination. You've got to appreciate the perspectives, the barriers, and the culture that fuels so many of our diverse women in our communities. And for our First Nations women in Australia, making sure that their voice is heard, that we acknowledge the effects, the absolute devastation of colonialisation and the effects that are still being put in place, and making sure that there is truth and voice given to our Aboriginal women to form their own policies and to path their own way when it comes to gender equality. And certainly we come from a very, very multicultural state where we need to make sure that we are listening to those voices. And we were blessed enough to do a regional convening conference ahead of this conference with our Pacifica women, and we heard exactly the same barriers that exist for women of diverse backgrounds in Australia, the exact same barriers that women are facing in the Pacific Islands. And quite frankly, you know, as a politician, I really truly believe that by getting more progressive women elected into our parliaments across the world, we see a better drive for gender equality as an outcome of that.
Well, thank you for your testimony and your work on that. And I know, speaking of trickling up, I believe Australia is advancing a First Nations foreign policy now, so that's really great to hear. Aya, we're on your continent. You get the last word. I'll say that I really appreciated an education that you've given me recently in your Twitter feed about what's happening to migrants in Tunisia as both a destination country and a through transit country. You touched on that a bit in your earlier remarks, but I do think that there does tend to be a tendency in this discourse to either focus on domestic or foreign, and then nobody wants to talk about immigration in the middle. And yet this is where we see these principles really falling down. So grateful if you could share a little bit more of your expertise with us today and close us out.
Yeah, I think first of all, I hear a lot the discourse about sub-Saharan Africa or this foreign policy, especially European countries. By the way, it's one-way stream. We don't have like Eswatini EU or Europe strategy or Ghana Europe strategy, but you find everybody have a strategy towards Africa, and it's called sub-Saharan. There is nothing, guys, exists that is sub-Sahara. We are Africa, we are one. I don't know why you see us divided between North and South. So if you want to have a strategy towards Africa, it is Africa. And back to your question, there was this rhetoric, both government and civil society around sub-Saharan migrants. They are black migrants. This is a conversation about blackness, because black Tunisians are also assaulted because of the state-sponsored fascist racism. So to explain what's happening internally, there are twofold. There is the national level, which started really in 2018 from a political party that started to brainwash people around hating migrants and campaigning, petitioning. So people see things happening this year, but this is a well-structured campaign that promoted an ideology of grand replacement and changing the ethnic fabric of Tunisia. And then in February this year, the presidency adopted this kind of ideology after a lot of organizing. It's also a way to a wake-up call to us, civil society. We need to organize as these far-right groups are organizing underground and publicly. The way they organized was to a point where the president of the state literally went on to have a discourse that is anti-migrant and anti-black. The other fold of it, and that went, we protested, we calmed things down, and that erupted 2 weeks ago again. The other fold of it and responsibility, of course, it's the European side of the Mediterranean. So this is really an equal responsibility, because Europe then would say, oh, this is you, Africa, deal with yourself and your problem. This was orchestrated by European leaders. So they need to have the same share of accountability and responsibility for all the thousands of African migrants dying in the Mediterranean. Now, moving forward into a feminist migrant policy and how I see it, first to move beyond this binary between citizen and migrant, legal, illegal, human, inhuman. We have to move beyond binaries, dealing with women as a homogeneous group and not in all their diversity. So that's one. Two, we have to have a security policy centered around human security and not militarization. A feminist foreign policy is about demilitarization. So for me, it's really important that whoever sits in the policy-making table, making those policy, men or women, to understand that weapons and arms will never guarantee our safety, never. And border policing the borders will never end migration. Just accept it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, organizers. Thank you, hosts. We are in the grand tradition of Women Deliver, running over time. So I will just say we appreciate that you've come curious. We hope your knowledge cup has been filled. We recognize the daunting task before us and the yawning gap that exists between the reality of today and the ideals that we are all working for in a more feminist future. but I'm grateful to these feminists for their work to get us a little bit closer every day. Cheers. Get my bag ready here. My mic. Okay, this one too. Okay. Can't wait for your panel. We're ready? All right. All right, how's everyone doing in there? All right. I know it's lunchtime, there's lots of delicious food outside, but you could get some more after. So, we still got more time to talk here about feminist policies. So, we are now going to turn to our second fabulous conversation around building peace across generations. The women that will be joining us, they have helped stop wars in their home countries. They have launched revolutions, and they have built with youth to combat the current crisis that the world is facing, including climate change, gender violence, and a whole other slew of problems, all through a feminist lens. Please join me in welcoming our next panelist, these three dynamic women, to our fireside chat. I can't hear you. Thank you. And here. Okay, here we have, on my left, Lema Bowie. She is a Liberian peace activist, social worker, and women's rights advocate. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her pivotal role in bringing together Christian and Muslim women to end Liberia's devastating 14-year civil war back in 2003. She is also founder and president of the Bowie Peace Foundation Africa. Let's give it up for Lema. Okay, and here we also have another fellow Nobel Peace Laureate. We have Tawakkol Carmen. Tawakkol is a human rights activist, journalist, and politician, known as the mother of the revolution and the Iron Woman. She played a key role in the 2011 pro-democracy youth uprising in Yemen. She was awarded the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize, right along with Lema, for recognizing her advocacy against authoritarianism, corruption, and oppression. And let's give it up one more time for Tawakkol. All right, and now over here, we have Davina Stella Malum. She is a multi-award-winning peace-building practitioner, a cartoonist, a humanitarian, and the CEO of Children for Peace, a youth-led organization coming to us from Cameroon. Thank you. Give it up for Davina. All right, well, let's get into it. Thank you so much for all being here. And I would like you to start off talking
from your own experiences as peace activists and leaders, what specific strategies have you found are most effective in promoting meaningful participation of women in the peace and security agenda? Can we start with you, Lema?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think the first place I want to start is the recognition that in every space, in every community, the women that live in those communities and spaces are their own experts. Most times people, when it's, say for example, there's war in a particular place, a lot of us have this mindset that we can go in and teach people how to do peace. And from my experience as an activist in Liberia, that is absolutely wrong. Women in every community, in every society knows exactly how their conflict started. They know the players. They know how and when things will unfold the way they will unfold. For example, in 1999, the women from one village told us we knew exactly when the fighters would strike. We knew exactly when the war would exacerbate. We knew all of these things. But sadly, when we're talking peace and security, in most instances, people are looking for experts from outside who have done desk reviews on these different countries and come in to be the ones to tell these women how. I think that's the first step, recognizing that the expertise is in the community, letting them lead their agenda, and then supporting from the back.
All right, thank you. It's a lot about how we define experts, you know? A lot of times we're used to those white men on the screen in suits, that they're the experts, but we're hearing from Lema, the experts really are the women that are living these experiences, and they are the ones that we need to turn to for solutions. Tawakkol, what do you think, your experience as a peace activist, what strategies have you found most effective?
Look, when we talk about how to guarantee the participation of women in peace and security, and what is the strategies that we want to, we should take, it should many things. It should take many things, many aspects. The education, the health, participation in peace negotiation if there is war, etc., etc. But the most important thing for me, and in addition to all these aspects, is how can we define the peace itself? The peace itself, for me, I defined it as not just the absence of war, it's also the justice. It's also the absence of oppression. That means that how can we support women who fight and struggle for justice, freedom, and democracy? It is not just a slogan on how can we make certain chairs for women to be in the decision-making places, which is very, very important, which is not exist in many, many places. But at the same time, how can we empower the voices of women, and how can we with them in their battle against authoritarian regimes and dictatorship? And this is exactly the meaning of how can we guarantee, how can we build strategies for women in peace and securities, because authoritarian regimes pose a great risk against peace and security, and we shouldn't let those women who is in the battle in their countries alone. And this is what most of the international communities, most of the countries around the world, especially the Western countries that claim they support democracy, they support women, they let women in the field down. They let them alone. And I am really, with my colleague from Tunis, Aya Shabi, with her all criticized when they just lectured about feminism while they are really away from supporting women and feminism movements.
Thank you for that. Yes, we often think that war is over that could be peace, but that's obviously not the case because there will never be peace without justice. So here we have also women that are experts not just in navigating conflicts, but post-conflicts, which are often a very important time to see how peace will unfold. Okay, Davina, what can you bring to the table? What strategies do you have?
Well, thank you so much for the question. Before I straight to the question, I believe that meaningful inclusion and participation of women in the peace and security agenda refers to the inclusive, intentional, and mutually respectful partnership with girls where they can share ideas, perspectives together. So as my journey as a peace activist, an adolescent peace activist, I work mostly with girls, so I treat the problems at the root. So, you know, we have implemented in my organization different strategies, but what I found most, you know, effective is implicating girls with their different diversities, their backgrounds and their identities. Because it is something that is really important, you know, organizing a space where they can give their different, you know, problems they have. So for the audience to be, you know, in the same line with me, I'm just gonna take a simple example. You know, there can be a group of, you know, 10 people maybe sick. They go to the hospital. Everybody's gonna, you know, be consulted by a general doctor. But if they are not given the space, you know, to express their minds, because many have toothaches, some have eye pains, and, you know, so when they are given the opportunity, they go to the different departments of the hospital, and there, you know, the problem is being treated. So I think from that, you know, we try to know the different problems per group, different girls and maybe women face, and from there now we try to implement programs in the relationship to that.
Okay, thank you. So context is everything, right? That we have to recognize each individual woman and each individual girl's context and listen to what they are bringing from their specific context. Thank you. Okay, now the next question we have here, because this is an intergenerational panel, is what can we do about collaborations for peace building, and why is it important for there to be intergenerational collaborations? If each of you could share any story from your past, or also one of the things that the Nobel laureates do that's really amazing is they don't just come and speak to you here on this table. They go every place they travel to, they meet with individual groups of girls and communities, and they learn from them and they share their stories. So feel free to share any story you like, but about successful collaboration between peace advocates across the different generations.
There is zero way I can sit here and talk about intergenerational collaboration without first talking about my journey. So I sit here as a product of mentorship. I sit here as a product of partnership. I sit here as a product of someone who was tutored along the way. And I sit in this seat on the laps of a Tweeder Cooper from Liberia. I sit in this seat on the laps of Gertrude Mongella from Tanzania. I sit in this seat on the laps of Ruth Gibson Caesar. I sit in this seat on the lap of Mama Grasa Machel. And the reason why I'm trying to bring all of these older feminists into this space as we talk is because there is absolutely zero way I would be here without the learning from a distance or even close by from some of the things that they did. So it is a given for me that if these women have poured into my life, into the way that they've done, why won't I want to pour into the lives of girls? I'll give a simple example with a Tweeder Cooper. I remember the first time I was giving a task. I had done trauma healing work with child soldiers all of the time. And so there was this opportunity to start something called the Women in Peace Building Network. At that time, West Africa was raging. Every country in that sub-region had some issues. Liberia, Sierra Leone, just think about it. I think Ghana was the only stable where Nigeria had its own issues. After the Women Peace Building Network was formed, they came to Liberia and said, we're appointing you coordinator. I had never interacted with the feminist movement in Liberia. My work was strictly with child soldiers, their wives, and different people. We got to that meeting, I was shaking because all I went into that room with my perception of women being bad, women not being good to each other, blah, blah, blah. Mind you, I have 5 sisters. My grandmother is my first feminist teacher, but still, working outside of my space was that. At Twitter Cooper, once they named me as coordinator, I whispered to her, because she was the one who was like reassuring. I said, Sugars, I can't do this. And then there was an opposition. One woman was screaming, we don't know her, she's never been in a movement, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, tears started coming. She pulled me in a room and said, dry your damn face. Wipe that tears off your damn eyes. Walk out there with your shoulders straightened up. You are going to be the coordinator and I will be your teacher. I walked out that room, took that position, and that woman guided me. It was never about me. It was never about speaking through the mic for me, but it was passing the mic on to me to say, do this. So the simple thing is, I'm here with 5 of my daughters. That's the first place intergenerational mentorship starts from. I think it's important for us in all of our spaces to give opportunity to the young women. I don't want to leave this world and not have a Divina to take over, or a Nekopi, or a Pudu, or a Nicole from DRC to take over where we left off. So there's no way we can talk peace and security without talking intergenerational, because each and every one of us have someone that drew us into this space.
Thank you so much for that. Tawakol.
Look, collaboration is very, very important. And we should work with each other, help each other, support each other. Especially now I consider myself as old generation, and now there is a new generation and my previous generation. And for me, frankly, without the experience of the old generation of women movement, I wouldn't understand a lot of things. And yes, I put something in addition to their movement, but without their struggle from the beginning, we couldn't, pass the way. So it's very important that we respect each other and we collaborate with each other. And we should also focus on the initiatives of youth. And they are, the youth are, the one who I wanted them not just to lead the future, to lead the current. And this is what we are focusing on in WI, Noble Women Initiative. We are, an organization gathered 6 noble women from different countries: Judy Williams from America, Lima Boy from Liberia, me from Yemen, Shirin Abadi from Iran, Rigoberta from Guatemala, and Maria Riza from Philippines. So all of us 6 are focusing on how can we collaborate with women NGOs around the world, and especially young women in the ground, helping them in their mission. And again, the strategies that we build for supporting women is to supporting their cause, their struggle, especially their struggle for justice and democracy. It is not just for putting them as a decor, giving them in a decor, position. But the challenge that we faced, that when we support those women and those young people in the ground, really, we are really become frustrated in many, many countries because, again, of the betrayal of the people in the policy-making positions in the world. For example, in Sudan, we have a great woman from Sudan, and she's here in our, she's one of our program, in our program in Sister to Sister. And she did a great work, and her sisters did a great work in the Sudanian revolution. And before that, she did a great, and suddenly the war came. and erupt in Sudan and collapsed all his work, all her work in the field. The same thing with me in Yemen and all people in Arab Spring countries. Why this happened against the efforts and the struggle of women in the field for justice, democracy, freedom, and equality? It is because the betrayal of the head of democratic countries that supports the dictators and support the counter-revolutions. Now the war in Sudan is supported by Saudi Arabia and Emirates from the behind. The same thing in Yemen. The war in Yemen waged by Saudi Arabia and Emirates and Iran, and all those countries doesn't feel consequences because of their their act against democracy and women's rights. So this is the reality. The women struggle, the women effort, the women overcomes and gains and prevail, been collapsed, not because we don't collaborate with us, not because those women in the ground, they don't know enough how to work. It's because the betrayal and letting them down. So we women around the world should raise our voice more and tell those governments to stop allying with dictators, to stop betrayal women's rights, to stop betrayal democracy and human rights. Democracy rights is not just a Western rights, it's our rights. They have to protect it, they have to stop their betrayal if they really, really want to support women's rights or to support women to deliver outcomes and gains and human rights all over the world.
Thank you, Tawakkol. Divina, one nice thing here about this conference is they don't just say, oh, we should listen to the youth. They also create many spaces for the youth and how not to tokenize youth in these struggles. So can you share your experiences, not as in passing on to the next generation, but what you have been able to learn from other peace builders and what you are building today?
Intergenerational collaboration is hope. With this overwhelming and situation happening in the world, finding hope and working, with different leaders is really a crucial step to peace building, because it is, an equipped weapon that permits us to expose the current situation and, anticipate the new challenges that may come up. As a peace leader, because I started my activity, I think I was like 12 years old. I witnessed for myself the impact of radicalization and violent extremism on a young girl, but I did a trip, in the north of my country. And I was like always seeing the young girl like crying, and out of pure curiosity, I was like, why is this girl crying? And I insisted before she told me she was married with, I can say, her ancestor and used as a sex slave, and I decided, what can I do for this young lady or other ladies or young people going through this situation? Then I created the organization. It wasn't easy for me at all, because I was in an, working alone, living in a patriarchal system where my family, my friends, and I had the support of nobody, including NGOs that work on those specific thematics. And I was like, when I understood the power of interconnection, that all of us, we are interconnected, I was like, why couldn't I do a collaboration maybe with other peace advocates, with other young organizations, youth-led organizations? And from there, I'm just doing a summary because we are running out of time. And from there, I saw that, wow, I saw the impact that I was waiting for, I think, for years when I was walking alone, having the support of nobody, you see, and seeing how girls that have been victims of violent extremism, children that have been victims, that have been ex-child soldiers, are being involved in peace clubs, thanks to the fact that I decided to collaborate even with older generations. So yeah, it's a really crucial step to peace building.
Thank you so much. Everyone here is so inspired. Always there's specific stories of people that have lived such horrible stories of violence, and that they have come through and been able to collaborate with each one of you on building this peace. So we are limited on time. This is going to be our final question. And I would like to know, as Nobel Peace Prize laureates and as a youth leader and influential figure, what advice would you give to people who want to build a feminist future?
It's really very interesting when we talk about a feminist future. And I think the first thing that I would like to say is, in order to build a feminist future, we must first, and people will say, this is what Women Deliver is all about, creating a space for people to talk about it. But there are three things, or three kinds of feminism that I've come to recognize, and it's not the ones that are in the dictionary, you know. I spoke about sitting on the laps of women before. So many years ago, as a young activist, I met Beriwa Jomo, she's from Kenya, and she told us her kind of feminism. These are the feminists who move from the heart. And don't get me wrong to say that we are not moving from the heart. But these were women who, the Beriwa Jombos, the Mama Grassa, the ones who were part of the liberation struggles. They didn't have air ticket to go to conferences. They didn't have DSAs. They didn't have any platform. Margaret Dongo, who fought alongside Mugabe for the revolution, for the independence of Zimbabwe. These are the category of women that I talk about. Auntie Beriwa would describe their kind of feminism as the feminism that just went out there and wanted to change the status quo. They weren't looking for likes, trends, or anything like that. That's the first kind of feminist future. The leaders. The second kind are the ones like you and I. I don't want to say I'm old because I still have my swag. But our generation were the ones who came out and challenged some of the status quo. We took these women advocacy to another level. We are more vocal. But beyond, they were more vocal than we were, but we were also cutting or carving out, looking for laws. So based on their advocacy, there was a Beijing. And we decided to take that Beijing to another level. The third level of feminists we have are the young people, the Davinas, my daughters, the one who challenges, but most especially, they're using technology and all of the things that we're not savvy with. So when we think about a feminist future, what I would love to see is a convergence of those three kinds of leadership styles to bring us back. So that style with the heart, the style with the vocal, and the style with using technology, bringing it all together. Because when you look at where we are right now, yes, we advocate, but most times in our feminist world, we are losing our humanity, like the political men, to more policy issue, technical issue, all of the different things. If we can bring it all together, we definitely would have the feminist future that we're looking for. That's what I hope to see.
All right. Thank you. We have the feminists from the hearts, the vocal feminist, and the feminists who know how to use TikTok. All right, Davina, what can you share for the people who want to build a feminist future?
Okay. Feminist future is, seeking and hoping to create a better world. And, it is really like a really vast question, because I don't think there are only females in the audience, but males too. So my advice concerns both females and males. To create that world, we need to study the world as it is right now to understand how system of operations operate. And there are three major pillars, that is studying, dreaming, and doing. And for doing, that is where my piece of advice comes in place. Because I know as leaders, there are many difficulties, there are many obstacles, because I am also a result of that, and I went through that. So I can say that you need to know that what is inside you is above any obstacle you may meet. And that if you want to see, like, I know it's not easy. There are times you may fall because it varies from person to person. Some may have like disappointment, others may lose like lack of confidence. But it is important to note the mystery of being persevering in your objective, staying focused on your vision and how you want to see the world tomorrow. Because I like said, if you want to see the change, be that change. Because change is a change unto the change, change is the changer. And you need to know that when you started your journey, you started for a reason. And keep this in mind when everybody's going to go back home from Kigali. If you stand up for a reason, be prepared to stand alone like a tree. And if you fall on the ground, fall like a seed that grows back to fight again. Thank you.
Keep your eye on the prize. When I asked last night, Davina and I were chatting, and stereotype, I was like, oh, you're young, do you have Instagram? And she was like, it's not part of my objective. So not every young person is lost in the internet. People have their eye on the prize, just like Davina, for making a more peaceful world. And now we are going to close out with the fabulous Tawakkol. What do you have to share for those who want to build a feminist future?
I really believe on women. I believe in the young people that will lead the future. So I'm talking to every woman who puts herself as as a woman who cares, and also any woman who doesn't put herself as a woman who cares, that they should reconsider her mission to the world, to her society, to be leader, to believe in yourself, to believe in your ability to create change, and to be the leader of a change. This is very, very important to every woman in the world, to make this world better for all the people around us, for all the people live in this world, and they can make it. Really, they can make it. The human rights is women's rights. The expression rights is women's rights. The climate rights, one of the speakers today said, it's women's rights. So all these rights, you as a feminist activist, you should consider it as your rights. We came from a delegation from Noble Women Initiative here to Rwanda, and visited many, many women in the villages, and yesterday was one of our best visit. We visited those women who were victims, and some of them were crying because they remember their past as a victim. And I told them, and the same thing now, I convey the same message to them and to all women here and all women in Rwanda and all women who really suffered from genocide, past is past. Now we should focus on future. No longer for these perpetrators to again hijack the future of our children. No more tears, no more cry. We should be the leader of the future, and that will not happen if you women stayed in the backstage. If you women stayed in the back seat, always be in the front, and you will make the change.
Thank you. We will not let anyone hijack our future, as Tawakkol said. Well, thank you to everyone. Our time has come. Please join me in giving a grand round of applause to our speakers and to everyone here in the room. Thank you so much. Thank you. You can all exit, and I will share a few final. Oh, you can. No. You can exit. Thank you. No. She wants a picture. Okay, fine. Come back. We want a picture. Quick. Oh, she got it. Okay. There we go. Okay, just wanted to invite everyone to go to the exhibition space. There's lots of amazing things there, and it's beyond the youth zone, so you could head to the terrace and cross the street, and there's the exhibition space. And I just wanted to also thank all of the interpreters, both the sign language interpreters, the Spanish and